This program was produced with the support of StoryHive, creativity connected by TELUS. For more information, please visit storyhive.com.
Well, I'm in over my head, no one told me. Trying to keep my footprint small was harder than I thought it could be. I'm in over my head, what do I really need? Trying to save the planet, oh, will someone please save me? Trying to save the planet, oh, will someone please save me?
Welcome to In Over My Head. I'm Michael Bartz. My guest today is John Chiefcalf. John is an unassuming and insightful leader who possesses a deep understanding of how to bring community together. In his role as secondary FNMI lead teacher over the past 2 years, Chiefcalf has demonstrated the ability to infuse Indigenous ways in Lethbridge School District number 51. Well respected as an educator and role model in the realm of professional learning, Chiefcalf understands successful leaders bring people together to achieve common goals. So welcome to In Over My Head, John. Thanks so much for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me with this interview.
For sure. So the reason I brought you on to this conversation is, so for me, I'm building this off-grid tiny home. I want to save the planet, and I feel in over my head. And I feel like so much of the conversation is about technology and how do we fix this and how do we, do that with something and build something. And so I thought I'd just bring another side of it. I was reading a book it was from Wade Davis. He's an anthropologist, a Canadian anthropologist. And it's called The Wayfinders, and it's about why traditional societies matter now. And a lot of it is about environmentalism. So I thought I would bring you in and talk about, from a traditional Blackfoot perspective, the environment and how we could possibly talk about saving the planet from your view. So my first question for you is, how does the traditional Blackfoot culture view nature?
Well, I just wanted to, again, just backtrack a little bit.
Sure.
So my grandfather and my father, they never really spoke Blackfoot.
Okay.
So my understanding is that through that language and through the description of that language and nature, the two are related. Except the only difference with that language is that you're really looking at nature as a complete animate system. So, just to kind of express a little bit of I guess you could say the confusion when I was going to school here in Lethbridge, is that if I was to look, like for example, if I was to say sun, and the Blackfoot, the English translation for sun in Blackfoot would be Natusi. But if I'm sort of understanding it from a Blackfoot perspective, it encompasses a process. So it would be sun, Natusi. It provides the right circumstance for us to be here. So some of the understanding about Blackfoot interpretation is that apistituki, meaning creator. There's a creative. It creates things, and then isipatipio, meaning, from what I understood, a source of life, meaning the energy it emits, what it does for vegetation, all the things that it does for the earth and for the human body. And then what it's also considered too is that san, meaning medicinal. What it does, it nourishes things. So the appreciation then becomes nitaksitak. I appreciate that intelligent system. So through the Blackfoot language, from what I understand, its nature is an intelligent system. And so if it's an intelligent system, then there are teachings in that system. So part of that system then teaches you how to survive in this environment, which of course can change quite fast. Teaches you how to survive in the winter and all the other things. And So you start to realize that the whole, well, at least for me, I start to realize that nature really is an intelligent system. So you would respect it as you would another human being. So if you take something from nature, you put something back in its place. In a sense, you try to continue to maintain an ecological imbalance, an ecological balance wherever your environment that you're in. So I remember when I was a kid, when we were kids, we used to go and pick all the driftwood, and we used to pile it up beside the house. We would burn certain parts of the grass, so it'd be green. This way, there wouldn't be any rattlesnakes nearby where we were at. The choke cherries were nearby. We went hunting for deer. We went fishing when I was kids. Me and my buddy, we used to go fishing at the St. Mary's River, and we would hunt pike. And so all of those things were natural. And the river was still quite clean. I remember as kids, we would pick colored rocks and throw them in the water and jump in with our eyes open to look which rock we threw in. So again, it's that whole connection to land, that relationship. And of course, you start to look at it sometimes in sequence and in patterns as well. And so I remember asking, one of my uncles years ago, why is the circle so important? And that the language, from what I understand, is based as a circular system, meaning that a lot of your entry points can come in from anywhere as well as your exit points. So, for example, the sun is round, stars are round, the trees are round, the ant hills is round, spider webs, rocks, rivers have semicircles, nests are round. And if you start to look at things around nature, the evidence in nature suggests that life is cyclical, circular. So your child, adolescent, adult, old age. So your mind transitions almost like from childhood to childhood. So it becomes cyclical again. But as I keep trying to understand the language more and more, I remember when I was a child, I used to look outside the window and I'd see my grandfather on a morning when the sun rises orange. And I used to hear him talk. And I was wondering why he was talking to the sun. And I noticed that the morning they'd be in orange, the clouds would be orange, the ground would almost be like orange. And what he was doing, as I found out later, is that he was assessing his life from the sun's perspective. And so with those, because now they're not just one perspective anymore, they're two perspectives. He's not just thinking about himself, he's thinking about his family, and he's thinking about the environment. And so when those things were put into perspective, what is your human connection to the environment and what is your non-human connection to the environment? And those perspectives I thought were really unique. So hierarchy, I guess you could say it wasn't really about hierarchy, it was more about pursuit of balance in that perspective. And so I to this day, I still think it's a really, really interesting way for me to look at nature as a form of balance. And then, there are small little things that still seem to help me personally. I seem to think a lot better in natural environments as opposed to man-made environments. And little questions start to come up sort of about just the Indigenous cultural perspective. And I remember a couple of years ago having a discussion with some teachers, and one of the teachers said that why is it that you don't interrupt another person when they're talking, specifically an old person, an elder, as we would call today. And I basically said that it's based on respect, from what I understand. And I had a hard time explaining that. So what we did was a group of us, I think it was 5 of us, we drove out to the reserve like 4:30 in the morning, and we just sat there. We didn't say a word. All of a sudden the coyotes were yelping, and then 500 yards behind us another group were yelping. So and then another group about a kilometer down the road. Again, all of that was done in sequence. And then when the coyotes were done, then the birds started chirping. Another set of birds started chirping. And then as the sun was coming up, a group of birds flew up in one direction of the hill, another group of birds flew up in another direction of the hill. And then they flew together in front of us, and then they flew away. So the idea is that it's, if I had spoken any time in between that time, we wouldn't have understood the full concept. We wouldn't have understood the full idea of how nature communicates and wakes up. So, and the idea is that you start to see nature through conversation as a cooperative system.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a different way that I grew up. So,
yeah, and from what you're talking about now, for me, I really hear the word respect coming out quite a bit, respecting nature, respecting the environment. Do you feel like that's out of balance now with the way things are, that we're not respecting nature the way we should be?
Well, I would have to say yes, mostly because of what it's done to me in a different sense. Because again, growing up with the Blackfoot language, it expresses itself as a circular system, as based on a relationship that everything is connected, and that there's really no hierarchical order, because your frames of references could be anywhere. It could be the sun, it could be an eagle's perspective, observing two rivers go down side by side that eventually come together. Like there's different ways to express wisdom through nature as well, through listening and observation. But then when I attended all my education in Lethbridge, I had to understand a hierarchy order. And so now frames of references were now separate. Now I was taught that nature is an animate and inanimate system. As opposed to Blackfoot, it's a complete animate system. So, through no fault of my teachers, when I was going to school, they just didn't understand the Indigenous frame of reference. And no fault through my grandfather and father, who never spoke English, didn't understand the frame of reference from an educational standpoint. So, in that, I think the balance, hopefully, what I'm finding is happening, but it has to happen through conversation to begin with. And so I just don't think we've had that conversation. I think we've had that conversation in pockets, but I think those are conversations that can begin to happen. So I would have to say that there is not a balance.
And do you think having those larger conversations, is that a way to possibly, as I say, save the planet, but to help with climate change, to make things more balanced possibly?
I think so. I mean, what I would have to say is that it helps to sort of reframe and reassess how we can understand nature and respect nature a lot more. Again, with perspective, I remember, in high school, a group of friends of mine came out to the reserve that I knew in Lethbridge, and we were having coffee sitting outside. And one of my friends says, John, how come you don't have a lawn? And I said, I told him, well, I don't understand. Why would you have a lawn?
Yeah.
So I said, the lawn is, like, to me, is the hills, the river, the natural environment.
And what was his response to why?
Well, his response, from what I remember, is that he still could not understand that concept. He says, you should have a fence. You should have, like, green. And I said, no, that doesn't make any sense to me. And so it was really interesting, but, and then I come to his house, and, he has a really beautiful lawn. Again, the good part about that friendship is that we were able to talk and to create some understanding. And then I remember a couple of months down the road, he would say, I remember him calling me, we were talking, and he says, well, when I have my own house, I may not have a lawn.
Nice.
So, but, again, unique insights, I think, really come with friendships as well.
Mm-hmm.
And again, being able to stay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I think also seen both sides of it, right? Because from his perspective, having a lawn make perfect sense, and for you, it just didn't. So, and is either right? I guess in this context, I would say no lawn is better from an environmental standpoint because they're pretty useless. But yeah, I think you're right. Having that connection and those friendships and having meaningful conversations that are productive, I think is a good thing as well.
It was interesting because it's amazing how I would have to say that, the more understanding that we got of each other, the more that we began to sort of ask some questions and explore things that I think that sort of was educational in a different sense for myself and for that group of individuals there. And so when I'm in the system here, and I'm trying to, express sort of an Indigenous perspective, my understanding is that nature is the foundation, and that if we listen to that process, and if we look at, what does balance mean, respecting nature, not taking things away, just kind of have some natural environments, then there's something to be learned from that.
Mm-hmm. And do you feel like you're making progress with those conversations? Are people receptive?
Well, I'm starting to find that those conversations are starting to happen. But one of the things about the Blackfoot language, which I think with people finding it difficult to understand, is that from my understanding, in order to understand the Blackfoot language, you have to experience the language. Very much like the way we went to go listen to nature wake up. Even some of the words that are descriptive, like if I was to say "oh popoka," and I would say "oh," there's almost like the sound of the wind of the prefix of that word "oh," and then "bo." It's a soft bounce. The wind is hitting you soft. Oh, bo. Then the suffix of that word "boka," child. Oh, popoka, soft wind. So when you talk to a child, soft tone. So, and again, you're experiencing that word in nature. When you experience those words in nature, you also express tone and respect in tone and communication. And I think that that's one of the reasons why the Blackfoot songs, I call them meditation tones or tones of expression. And they'll be called to sort of help other individuals. They would call them healing songs in a sense, because you're constantly expressing a positive intention back to that individual through song. So, but you would have to participate in that to understand that, because you'd have to feel the vibration of the drum and sitting around that group.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a lot different from reading it in the text and looking at just translation. It wouldn't be the same.
Mm-hmm. So is there an opportunity for people who aren't from the Blackfoot culture, maybe in southern Alberta here, is there an opportunity for them to learn more about the culture, about the language, to get involved, possibly?
I would say that there is, but I've experienced that sort of in three different ways. One is when I've taken teachers and individuals like to participate in the words, whether that's a walk through nature, looking at nature as an animate system, looking for evidence in nature to support the curriculum that they're teaching. We often talk about like Indigenous math, like, it's really hard to find a concept of math from an Indigenous perspective. But if we look at it from a sort of different set of lens, it's very close to sequence math, like Fibonacci math. Again, you're looking at patterns and circles and triangles. You're looking at sequences in leaves and pine needles, and so you're looking at sequence, and that's the way I've understood math in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of it, from what I've understood, is relationships. So it is hard to have that conversation, because I can speak with another Blackfoot individual that was raised similar like that, and we could understand nature, especially when it's spoken in Blackfoot. But then with a non-Indigenous component, that conversation takes a different turn. That conversation now becomes, well, you always connected to nature. How have you done that? Maybe that's your starting point.
Mm-hmm.
So what I find is that with non-Indigenous people, it's when I'm working, I usually will ask, what is your connection and how do you connect? And does any of that connection, can you find an insight into a Blackfoot Indigenous connection?
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost as if they have to reconstruct their frames of references, or deconstruct as well. And then sort of start looking at things from, again, different perspectives, from that inanimate perspective, but also from that animate perspective. So I would have to say that there's more tools through an educational sense to have those conversations. And I'm thinking that for me, I'm finding that those conversations are still now starting to happen, as opposed to when I was really young. We didn't even touch it. We didn't even touch it in the curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
I know when I was young, I think the only Indigenous content we had in the curriculum was the Aztecs and Iroquois, and that was like about 2 or 3 pages, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so now there's we have to cover the TQS 5 with the Alberta curriculum, Teacher Quality Service 5, about Indigenous ways of knowing. So it's I would have to say it's a fairly new conversation.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, it sounds like it's happening, and people are are open to it, so that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much for this conversation, John. I think I've learned a lot, and I really hope that people connect more with nature today or in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Okay, that was my conversation with John. The biggest thing for me was I loved his storytelling ability. It really drew me in, and I think if we can have more conversations like that, then we're getting somewhere. That's all for me. I'm Michael Bartz. Here's to feeling less in over our heads when it comes to saving the planet. We'll see you again soon. In Over My Head was produced and hosted by Michael Bartz. Sound engineering by Rodrigo Enriquez. Original music by Gabriel Thane. Special thanks to Lisa Pruden and Jessica Gibson.
This program was produced with the support of TELUS.